plan against them, or do you need a consistent plan? It's a big mystery for both of these teams, I think.
That's right, and we'll see what they have in store for us as the mystery shall be solved. Omega Pump and Reload Esports are ready to go. Let's get into game number 1 here in the Sanguine Depths.
And we are going in directly. Both of these teams have very similar comps here. They're both running the Vengeance and Holy Paladin that we've seen so many times in this tournament. We have 2 mages, and we will see in a second, but I think both of them are playing Frost. And then we have 2 rogues, the only difference being Omega Pump running that Windwalker, whereas Reload Esports has that Shadow Priest on deck. Drednos, what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting difference in compositions. One thing that I am looking for as well is the legendary choice on the Frost Mages. I think from the damage here that Simpkins is putting out, there's a good chance he's on that Night Fae legendary, but once our companion updates, I will confirm that. I think he was the first person to debut that legendary as well. And I think it was even in this very dungeon, so yeah, definitely something that... The question then is, like, has Dr. J adapted to that as well, or are they still on the old game plan of the Frozen Orb legendary? Which, so for those who don't know, yesterday we saw Reload Esports breaking out that really cool Night Fae legendary, and they were nearly able to win this map against Echo even. They came very, very close to it, and once again...
Okay, I have it.
Yeah, Simpkins is
want to know?
It. Dr. J is still on the Frozen Orb legendary. Now, the Frozen Orb legendary is better single target damage. It's actually not even that much better if there are mobs being pulled onto bosses, though, is the thing, right? So you can see here, both teams getting started with Crixus the Voracious. There are a lot of targets here, which means that Frozen Orb legendary doesn't really do that much anyways, because you just have infinite Fingers of Frost already. And then the Simpkins option here, you can see it's just doing so much damage compared to the rest of the group. Although actually Dr. J is doing similar damage, just Simpkins is that much further ahead than the rest of the team with no Windwalker on the side of Reload Esports.
But something you have to notice is that Reload Esports actually pulled Incinerator Arcoleth into that huge pull together with the boss, whereas Omega Pump decided to leave him behind. So they need to backtrack after they finish that boss and do the Torment mob before they can continue, whereas Reload Esports just decided to do it all together, something few teams have attempted, and it has not always gone great for them, but right now it's looking very, very good for the side of Reload Esports. Although they have a little more HP on Crixus, they already have the Incinerator down.
Yeah, this is actually a really, really big opening play for Reload Esports. We saw this in their series against Echo as well, where Echo ended up doing what Omega Pump are doing, right? And pulling the boss and then going backtracking afterwards, taking care of Incinerator. But Reload Esports have found a way to make this pull work with Incinerator in there, and now they've executed it successfully with 0 deaths in back-to-back attempts of this dungeon. So they've definitely got the strategy required to figure this out and make it reliable. I mean, that is really impressive because we know that a lot of teams are not comfortable doing that. And look at these orbs nearly getting to Crixus. They're right up against the wall as they finish killing it. Very beautifully calculated. They're now making their way into the rest of the dungeon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we saw already, Omega Pump is still backtracking, doing that crash pull around Arcoleth and getting that buff, while Reload Esports is setting up the next big pull, and they have the Sentinel in there. And that's a very scary pull right here. We have seen teams wiping to that pull, full wipes and single player deaths. But for now, it's looking really, really clean on the side of Reload Esports. They just have to make sure they're not taking too much extra damage here. And that is the Overseer going down from here on. It should be a little smoother for them to get through it. And I'm very impressed by what they're delivering right now.
Yeah, Reload Esports, this might be their best dungeon from what we've seen out of them so far. This was one where they were in this series against Echo, and it was they ended up losing this map, but it was by such a small amount and with like a slightly sloppy pull at the end. But other than that, this was a dungeon where they not only looked like they could take the map off of Echo if Echo made a mistake, they just looked like they could actually just take the map off of Echo if they played cleanly, which is a very rare spot to be in. It's very, very few teams that are able to have their, just if we execute our strat well, we don't care what Echo does, right? We have a faster plan, and that is such a rare place to be in. Even Incarnation, a lot of the way that they won that last series involved things going a little bit wrong for Echo as well. But Yeah, Reload Esports really have just a great game plan in here. This looks like a dungeon that they have practiced, and they have had some great ideas for how to attack it. And I think, again, if you keep looking at those damage meters, Simkins is just such a master of that Frost Mage, doing so much damage on every single pull. The overall DPS that he is putting out on that character is completely unethical. I have no idea exactly where he's finding all those extra DPS, but it is impressive.
It is, absolutely, and we had a very spicy moment for Megapump just there as the Overseer was stacking up, but they managed to get out of it using all of their defensives, and now they have stabilized a little bit. However, they're still behind Reload Esports, who have moved on to the next bigger pull, and I do agree, I'm not quite sure what Simkins has done with that mage build, but it's very, very huge numbers here in that Sanguine depths again and again. It's not that he's just being lucky, he can replicate it and actually have that damage every time in this dungeon, so that's very, very impressive from them here.
Yeah, if you look at the count here, you can see Reload Esports have earned about a 8% advantage. They're going to be pulling Executioner of Ruth forwards. They're taking it with them in towards this Lantern section. Omega Pump on a bit of a more standard strategy. This is even something you can do on the live servers, minus a little bit, right? Don't pull the Overseer into this, but pulling Varuth into the Head Custodian here is definitely an option if you are feeling ambitious. Even that is pretty scary, though. But you can see Omega Pump, they're making relatively short work of this. That High Custodian does still have a little bit of extra health, so they are going to have to finish that off. But they get to get their anima powers. Meanwhile, Reload Esports, they have activated that Lantern. They are starting to stack up their buff, and they are going to get a nice refresh here off of all of these mobs that are coming in towards the end of the pull.
Absolutely, and I think that buff will be really, really important for them going forward from here. I'm curious to see if Omega Pump can actually replicate a similar stacking, since they didn't pull the Executioner in there together with the other mobs, so now they're setting up a bigger pull right here at the beginning, which will lead to them having more mobs die at the same time, so they're not refreshing that buff every time if they kill them simultaneously. So you need to keep that in mind. That Reload Esports has maybe a little more uptime here, but they are also moving on to the next one. That is a beautiful rip there on Malik from Markin, and they are now LOSing everything to get that huge pull under control.
The Ring of Frost beautifully placed there to get every single mob in position. It's going to be followed up by the Sigil of Silence to stop the cast for a while, and you can see the stacks are starting to refresh from that Lantern as the smallest health mobs in this pull are dying, and once again, they just need to focus all of this damage. The Sentinel here being the mob that has the most health, really good target to pump those Eviscerates into, to pump those Isolances into, as they start finishing off the rest of this pull with this full 10 stack of the Lantern buff, and if they can keep this momentum going and take it into the boss, and they actually are pulling this Vestige towards the end of the pull, maybe they'll get one more refresh off of it. No, it's coming on an adventure with them. It is coming with them onto this boss fight, as they are going towards that fight at 76% count. They have expanded their lead a little bit against Omega Pump, who are trying to do a similarly sized pull on that Lantern that Reload Esports have just left.
Yeah, absolutely. And that pull is looking so scary right now for Omega Pump. They seem to have everything under control, but there are mobs behind them at the very moment that they would need to get in. And there we are, the Scribe is not in that pull yet. They will try to knock it there, but their HP bars are dropping so low. Maystein on 10%. Moat can top him off, and they managed to get out of it quite alive, but that was scary there for them. Reload Esports, meanwhile, is nearly done with Tower World. There's not much they need to do in order to finish it. It is tyrannical, so all of these bosses are a little more scary than we are used to them being. Plus, it is 21, so there's always something that could go wrong potentially, but with only 20% left on Tower World, I don't think there should be any trouble coming for them as of this moment.
Yeah, you can see just how big this lead is that Reload Esports have opened up. They are a full boss fight, almost ahead of Omega Pump here. They'll be heading downstairs, and they will have their Ashen Hallow up in 45 seconds, so it won't be up on full for the boss fight, and they will have to take probably one hit of damage before they can use it. But then it will be available once they get to the end of the boss, or once they start getting to the middle where the big damage hits start coming out. So that will be a useful thing for them as they get going here. Every single trash mob is getting pulled in to this boss. Should be pretty easy to keep under control with the Sigil of Silence largely stopping those casts, as you can see, coming out now, and they are firing off all their cooldowns, getting started on the third boss.
Very, very nice. That's exactly what you want to see. They have those mobs completely under control. They're dying right in front of them, and Gorilla is also losing HP quite quickly. That is the first AoE coming through, and we see Simpkins go into Ice Block, just make sure more of his teammates can get those orbs, and he doesn't have to move to lose damage. So that is it. The mobs are mostly down. Only one Vestige is left, and they will finish that up. Simpkins popping his seed here. That was too much damage coming in, but he should be up and ready in a little while. Mickey has his hand over him, protecting him from that very, very scary boss that they are now facing. I do think the last boss in Sanguine Depths is a little more scary just because of all the torments that we're stacking on it. But in terms of incoming damage, the Grand Proctor is definitely a force to be reckoned.
Yeah, the Grand Proctor, you can actually see here, Omega Pump are living up to their name. They are pumping damage there. Pump mode on that Holy Paladin is just built differently as well. Look at that 27,000 DPS topping the charts for Omega Pump there. And this is actually helping them close the gap compared to Reload Esports. They have Grand Proctor really now just 20 percentage points behind Reload Esports. This is going to be so close, and a pivotal decision is going to be made in the coming seconds here for both teams. Sagadon is standing there menacingly. Yeah, off to the side. The question is, are they going to fight it now, or are they going to empower that last boss with that Tormented? Or Simpkins goes down for Reload Esports. They're going to have to use a battle res there. Not too costly, but that is a little bit of time, and that lead shrinks ever more.
Ankler is also super, super low together with Malik. And remember that battle res always costs them extra time, not only because of the penalty, but also because you need to pick that person up. That's a cast, and you're losing all of the damage that the person did while they're dead. So that is definitely a little throwback here for Reload Esports. And I'm curious to see which of these teams dare to face General Call without the Sagadon buff, because that will be super, super scary when we get to it. Do you think that one of the teams decides to play Sagadon? Because it would be the safer way, but maybe they're just feeling like they should be daring, I guess. So we see Reload Esports walking towards the skip.
And they ended up losing their series against Echo. It's hard to say it was because they didn't pull Sagadon, because I think if they had pulled Sagadon, they would have lost on time. And the way they didn't pull Sagadon, they ended up losing to a wipe, or a half wipe on the last boss. Yeah, it's a tough call to make here. You can see both teams are deciding to skip Sagadon, and I think this is good. When you skip Sagadon, that means your fate is in your hands, right? It's about whether you can execute on the last boss. If you're trying to play Sagadon, then you're leaving your fate in your opponent's hands, right? You're going to be like, okay, we need our opponents to do badly rather than we need to do well ourselves. And I think that at the end of the day, you know, if it works for you in this game, maybe you can make that argument. But if you want to be a winning MDI team long term, you've just got to make it so that you make the plays where, you know, your fate is in your hands, right? You have to play well rather than ever relying on your opponents making mistakes.
That's very true, but it also means that you're trusting a little bit in correct RNG. And Pump mode is super, super low. He was on 9% there, but managed to top himself up. He still has Lay on Hands ready in case he needs it, so he was brave enough to not use it here. But that was definitely very scary there for a second. And I think Mega Pump are just a little tiny bit behind Reload Esports, and it will come down to how much damage they can do at the very end of this boss, so in the boss fight area. And we've seen something from certain teams where they're actually deciding, and I think Reload Esports was one of the teams to do that. They just pulled all of the trash into the boss room, bloodlusted there, and like damaged it down together with the boss, which is a very scary thing to do with all of those torments up. But I do think after both of those teams skip Sagadon, both of them will attempt to do that giant pull.
Yeah, Reload Esports certainly will attempt that. They have been going on their Sanguine Depths game plan that includes that pull up to now. Omega Pump also making their way towards the end of this gauntlet. They are definitely still behind, but they are at 0 deaths as well, so there will be 5 extra seconds that they have to complete this dungeon. I think they're behind by probably about 30 right now, but it could be maybe even a minute as Reload Esports are getting started with this last boss pull. They are into that room, and you can see the entire team just running right through this room, getting ready to get started with this boss. This is what it's all going to come down to. If Reload Esports can make this pull work, they are going to win this game. Ashen Hallow goes out of time warp every single cooldown as they get started on the last boss.
Exactly. We have Saka up, we have Meta up. My cats are actually going wild at this very moment. I hope you cannot hear that. But everything is popped for Reload Esports here. They're doing their very best to pump those numbers and dodge, which is super hard because they have the slow debuff from auras up here. So they need to be quick and move in a way that allows them to dodge everything. And we see the bleed debuff getting on our Shadow Priest here, and that is so scary. He has Desperate Prayer running, but can he make it? Mickey said yes, he is saving his teammate here. Effortless, they are going through that boss fight, and it seems like they're doing quite a good job of it.
Yeah, Omega Pump need to get back into this, but there's no way they can do that with this boss health differential. It is all about Reload Esports now. If Reload Esports can just avoid wiping here, they will have game one in this series, and they are doing a great job so far. 54% on the boss's health. The boss does die at 50%, but you can see Malik under so much pressure here. No cheat death available, no last resort, no anything here, and they are going to get back into this Gloom Swall shield here. 53% and dropping, but their damage has really fallen off right now. They are out of all of their cooldowns. They're just doing everything they can to make it a little while longer. The bleed hits much of the group here. You can see the dot ticking on everybody. They still have a little bit of mana, and they are going to finish the boss, taking game one in the series up against Omega Pump.
Wow.
And victory in game number one there. And, you know, we talked about it going into it. What kind of Reload Esports would we see here, Tettles? And right now they have just come to game, and they are coming for this victory.
Dude, we were talking about what kind of Omega Pump we were going to see too, and both of these teams looked cracked in Sanguine Depths, except Reload Esports was just twice as cracked on a couple of their pulls, which propelled them to victory. Dude, some of those pulls that they did, look at the difference in the DPS. 80 versus 84k, and that's because of like two pulls in particular that we're going to highlight, but like, oh my gosh, this run from them was insane. Yeah, I mean, let's just go ahead and take a look at it. I think the first thing for Reload Esports is that pull that they did into Crixus, where you have Simkin sitting in this ice block. And this is not an intuitive pull because the Gluttonous Ticks aren't going to start casting on him, and every mob is going to get grouped up. This allows them to get the Incinerator Arcoleth into the boss. And this is like a pull that we've seen a lot of groups and a lot of teams struggle with. But with how they were using the ice block here to get all of the mobs grouped up, to get the boss pulled, and everything stacked so fast, that allowed the pull to be very clean. Where Omega Pump here does Incinerator Arcoleth with a couple of with some of these trash mobs, so it's like not the worst thing in the world. But this is just one additional pull that that Reload Esports didn't have to do. Then they were kind of going through the dungeon at about the same pace, going through like the second boss and whatnot at about the same pace. Then the third boss, Omega Pump just, I don't know, found Dr. J level of infinite damage and just clawed this back. They made up something like 60% boss HP. I'm still not exactly sure what happened. Maybe Dr. J turned on like a trance playlist or something like that. But he was really bumping. But then Reload Esports, this is twice as bumping. They did all of this trash into the lantern, and you know it's a good pull whenever your Shadow Priest has to pop Dispersion for movement speed. That's how you know. That's how you know that you've made a pull really good. Is whenever your Shadow Priest has to pop their defensive to run ahead. And Omega Pump didn't do a pull that big. Reload Esports was able to just take it all the way with those two pulls of differential. That's honestly the only difference between the two teams, are those two pulls that that Reload Esports made into one pull that Omega Pump just decided to play a little bit more conservative. And Omega Pump, honestly, played great. It's like not even a knock on them. They played that, honestly, as well as they routed. They had 0 deaths. They looked like they had very minimal mistakes. They did insane damage on Berlia. There's nothing to really even complain about. It was just, man, Reload Esports looked good there. Holy.
Yeah, you love to see those matchups when it's just, you know, if you're taking additional risks, one extra big pull here or there, something like that, and you're able to make it work. So very incredible job there by Reload Esports, because that's also going to be something we want to see from them and have kind of expected from them, at least Stratnos, from the first matchup that we saw.
Yeah, Reload Esports have looked so good in some of their dungeons, and then they've had really it was just the Necrotic Wake where things were so rough for them, but Necrotic Wake notably not in this series as we are moving on towards 20 Tyrannical, Necrotic, Spiteful, Theater of Pain, and Omega Pump's tournament life here is now on the line. They need to win these next 2 games, and then they need to win the next series if they want to overcome that 2nd seed curse and actually secure a ticket to the global finals. But that would come, it's such an uphill battle now because they have to win again both of these maps, and then they have to win a series against Echo immediately afterwards. This is wow, for both of these teams, things are so rough from here.
Yeah, the wall doesn't get any easier to climb from this point at all, right? And I don't think anybody was really expecting to see Echo, of course, be the gatekeeper as well, makes in that lower final matchup. So the challenges and the stress for these teams has to be even higher. They might say, okay, we got to get ready to play Incarnation. We're going to get ready to, beat Reload Esports or beat Omega Pump, and then we got to take on Incarn. And then you see Echo there, who are also fresh off of a defeat, which means they are insanely motivated and angry and want to win.
Yeah, that's very true, although that might also be in favor for the contesting teams, right? Because Echo is a team that is known for being in a very, very good headspace. So whenever I talk to Gingy or like other players from the MDI team of Echo, they were like, yeah, our team works so well because usually when somebody makes a mistake, we just brush it off and we know that we can do better in what the mistake was and we're not tilting in that way. And somehow this has not worked out for them today. We could see them be very frustrated. We could see those little mistakes get to them. And that is something that might just be, in luck for Reload Esports or Omega Pump here today when they face Echo. We don't know just yet.
That's right. We certainly were able to see from the player cams as well that bit of frustration coming into play there, Tettles. And, right off the bat, you got to start saying, okay, are they going to be able to bring it back to it? And Omega Pump and Reload Esports, they both got to prove themselves before they can go into that matchup.
Well, I mean, we've been harping on their consistency. Both of these teams, I feel like, have the exact same problems where they're just not as consistent, but they can put up absolutely world-class times if they can be. Man, in that first map, I feel like it's just a coin flip for the Theater of Pain. If both of the teams can show that level of consistency, neither of these teams have played Theater yet, from what it looked like whenever I was just scrolling through a second ago. But it's going to come down to consistency. There are a couple of pivotal pulls where it's that gourd chop snap, whether teams are going to do it or not. It's still up in the air whether or not that thing is great or not. And then just a lot of compositional stuff. It is a very difficult... Theater Pain this week is very difficult because it is a tyrannical, spiteful, necrotic. We've seen a lot of teams elect to run that Protection Warrior, like that Dwarf Kyrian Prot Warrior. Very good pick. Is anybody going to bust out the Prot Paladin? Maybe not. I think that may be just a dorky special, but,
I think that is a dorky special, yeah.
It's been seen, so I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Arms Warrior? Dratnus?
Arms Warrior? It's good.
Maybe.
Yeah. My sword can eat your sword.
We could still see a Holy Priest, just saying.
As much as I would love to see that, I'm not holding out too much hope here, okay? Last I checked, Mode had the word Holy Priest banned in his chat, so I wouldn't be looking to him to be the one to be playing
as
that
he should.
One. Unfortunately. All right, Tettles. My invitation to do keys next week is revoked with you. All right, I'm bringing Dratnus along.
Oh.
Well,
this is bad news for 3 of us.
That laugh is telling me he's not that
This
friendly.
is bad news.
It feels bad, man.
Three of
Feels
us.
bad, man. Theater of Pain, game number 2 is set to square off right now as Omega Pump facing elimination. They really need this one if they want to continue to survive in our Group C lower semis. Let's get into it. Reload Esports up 1 here in Theater.
Both teams here getting started with this big pull right into the boss. We do have a mirrored composition between the two teams, the kind of standard prot warrior melee gang lifestyle from both teams. Mode instantly deploying that Ashen Hallow, and they are doing so much damage. Actually, both teams here deploying huge amounts of damage. Looks like the Crane has smiled upon Reload Esports as look at that monk damage. Oh my goodness.
Any CG procs?
Yeah, it looks like some... Actually, and you know what? It might not just be the Chi-Ji procs. It looks like also that Valkyr form. Actually, both
Yeah,
mobs on
it
both
is-
sides
it is
are using
Valkyr.
that polearm that lets you turn into a Valkyr on a 3-minute cooldown for a big hit of secondary stats. So that is definitely a source of some of that huge Windwalker burst on that 3-minute cooldown.
And I have to say, just looking at the bus percentages here for this very second, it seems like Omega Pump is just a teeny tiny bit in front of Reload Esports by like 3% on Decia. So we might see them be a little more forward here in this tournament, whereas Reload Esports has proved that, you know, today is a day where they will play exceptionally well. That Sanguine Devs was super, super clean with those giant big poles. But in Theater of Paint, there aren't that many spots where you can actually execute such big pulls due to the way the dungeon is laid out. So I'm curious to see how they will try and adapt to that.
Yeah, you can see one boss dead for both teams. They've both focused on Decia. Decia is the one that causes the most trouble for your tanks. Frog Warriors in particular don't love having 40 necrotic stacks. They are able to survive through it, though. Reload Esports are going to get their first boss killed, and it looks like it's going to be a 5-second advantage for Reload Esports here. Otherwise, the two teams are looking very equally positioned here. Almost everything identical between the two. A couple of other small differences in what they're running. Dr. J actually on that Mechanome, whereas Simkins instead playing Dwarf. So pretty cool, pretty cool little racial there. Mechanome. We've seen a little bit of Mechanome out of some teams, but usually we see the Dwarves or the Night Elves.
Yeah, and I mean, it usually makes sense because just a dwarf racial is very, very good in that tournament here to remove just certain stacks. And right now, Reload Esports has already started pulling Executioner and some of those souls together, a pull we've seen many, many times here, while Omega Pump is just now doing that. And I'm a little bit confused because Omega Pump was so far ahead. I mean, not super, but like by a tiny bit during the boss fight, and Reload Esports has filled that gap and overtook from there on. Now we're going to Shroud on the side of Reload Esports through those Shackled Souls, because I think we're going to pull some of them into Koltha later when we play that boss, and now we should be seeing the Incinerator together with the Portal Guardian here from both teams, I think.
Yeah, both teams are grabbing the Incinerator and the Portal Guardian, and it looks like it's going to be something like 3 Shackled Souls also joining now. Omega Pump reaching this area about 15-20 seconds after Reload Esports, and they're actually, you know what, this is kind of reminiscent of last dungeon where they just fall a little bit behind, never recover, and if that happens again, they will be out of our tournament to Reload Esports, who are currently working on just these last 2 mobs. A beautiful Ring of Peace binding shot combo is going to save them from any spiteful danger as they've finished off the Portal Guardian and are now just working on the Incinerator. Omega Pump look like they're doing a little bit more even cleave here, and you can see that's putting a lot of pressure on their health bars. But it does mean, in theory, they should be able to gain a little bit of time from the extra efficiency of doing damage that way.
I mean, that is true, but also when you're putting much pressure on the HP bars, that means Won't has to heal instead of actually dishing out damage. So I'm not sure if that is really the way you want to go about this. They are now at the portal moving forward, but still a little bit behind Reload Esports, and Simkins actually dies here. They rest him back up, but that is the battle rest for Reload Esports. And I think, was it a Spiteful that killed him? I didn't see it.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Definitely plausible, as Reload Esports now are taking that 5-second penalty. They've finished off their Bone Magi, heading down to that next platform. Omega Pump all get the click as well. Beautiful avoidance of the Spiteful mechanic. Now both teams making their way to that next platform, really neck and neck here. In fact, when you factor in those 5 seconds, I think they are at exactly the same spot in the dungeon here. This is a tie, a perfectly tied game, as actually Omega Pump are going bigger here? Are they? No, okay, they pulled the opposite side.
I don't think so. They're both playing 4 of those Magi, as you said, together. And that is something we've seen before, but Reload Esports is struggling really, really hard here. They have all of their DPS players down and are now just trying to finish up on that Port Guardian. They have no battle rests left. They need to kite and stay alive, and Mickey is doing a fabulous job of that, kiting those Spiteful Shades, but he is dropping to that debuff, and now Malak is alone here trying to fight for his life.
Yeah, shield wall's gonna be used there, and I think he might be able to get through this. Fires off a big shield, and he's gonna kill off one of them. Has Spell Reflect active, but it looks like that Reflect is not going to connect with that next Necrotic Bolt, and he's at 1% health. Trying to Thunderclap here, not going to be enough. Oh, Heartbreaker for Reload Esports. One Soulbinder still left alive, and now Omega Pump are firmly in the driver's seat here. They are already on that next platform. They don't have to deal with this run back, and actually on the side of Reload Esports, things have gotten from bad to worse because they don't have a Shroud available. They're actually just going to have to deal with these Shackled Souls now rather than pulling them in during the boss fight, so even more time lost as a result of this.
Yeah, and that is very, very harsh on them. That is something we did not want to see from Reload Esports here at this point in time, because those really big holes, as I said before, were something that worked in favor for them in the Sanguine Depths, that they're really good at executing normally. And now that big pull on the Magi has actually thrown their run to pieces, and they have to follow up on all of that route. And that is such a long route with all of the portals in between that they now need to catch up on.
Yeah, they are. This was not just a wipe. This was a wipe in a pretty costly spot, right? Sometimes you can full team wipe and then release, and what it ends up costing you is the 25 seconds. In this case, they lost the 25 seconds, the run back, the efficiency of pulling those onto the boss, and they still have to finish off the Soulbinder. Now, it's just one Soulbinder, it won't take too long, but it is a little bit more salt in the wound here for Reload Esports, as they are now something like 2 minutes behind, if I had to say. Quite a large gap that has been opened up against Omega Pump.
And that is actually very interesting, because earlier today I saw one of the players from Reload Esports say on Twitter that Halls of Atonement will be where it all comes down to whether or not they win this tournament. So maybe they just weren't that confident, but confidence is something they are showing now. They're going back in on a big pull here and pulling all of the Magi together with the Bone Reaver, and that should go down quite easily. They're getting those interrupts right on the correct target, while also Mega Pump is nearly on 50% loss percentage here on Coulter Rock, and they should be able to just kite those spiteful shades from the souls away, and that is that. Now they only need to deal with the debuffs and the high incoming damage here from the boss, but that should be very easy for them.
Yeah, Mega Pump doing a great job here against Kultharok. 34%. They don't really have many DPS cooldowns, so the boss's health is probably going to drop fairly slowly from here. But the hard part is mostly done, and actually, Dr. J has gotten back to his resonating arrows. So that will be another nice little hit of damage. For those who are wondering as well about the Hunter Soulbind choice, Dr. J has gone with the Forge Light tree, that rightmost tree, the third tree for the Kyrian. And that's giving him a fairly short cooldown on Resonating Arrow, whereas Simpkins is on that Pelagos, which is a bit more of a standard single-target-oriented one, compared to the more experimental Mythic Plus AoE build that Dr. J has gone with.
All right, that is some very neat information for us. So maybe it'll work out for them through the bosses that just have so much HP here. But Reload Esports is still struggling, trying to follow up on that huge lead Omega Pump has on them. They will now try to actually completely annihilate that boss here, so they can have any chance of coming back in this key here, while Omega Pump is doing that really beautiful big pull that we love to see here in Theater of Pain, where you need to control all of those ads. You don't want any of the withering discharges to go through, but you also don't want any of the meat shields to cast, so the mobs don't gain more HP. And that is Stone going down for a Mega Pump. That was just too much damage coming here on him. Now they need to kite that huge pack until he's back with his group here. Very scary moment for a Mega Pump right at this moment, but here he is, the hero of the hour, coming back to save his team, and he gets that pull under control. My oh my.
Yeah, this is a great example of a death that was really not very costly. The release point is very close to here. Just one player died. They were able to kite for a little while. And yeah, the kite looked kind of scary. It looked like there were 40 mobs chasing them. But actually, like 30 of those were Spiteful Shades, so it wasn't that bad. Those things expire anyways, and you're already supposed to kite them, so you're already doing what you want to be doing as Omega Pump. Now sneaking past this gas bag, making their way downstairs. Let's see. So that because they're all going here, this means they aren't having any designs on doing the snap to gore chop strategy, and they are instead just going to ethically pull this bridge as the developers intended. All of these mobs coming together, and this is actually, yeah, this is probably more than developers intended right now, as we have 12 different enemies all engaged right now. That Spear Bastion keeping them beautifully gripped up, preventing them from jumping out and causing too many problems for its duration, and they've already taken care of the meat of this pull already.
Of the meat of this pull. What a nice way to phrase this. Yeah, they're getting through that pull effortlessly. No problems whatsoever for Omega Pump here. They will move on to the next two mobs and pull them into the boss. No problems occurring for them. Very, very clean run, except for that one death. But as you said, that didn't cost them anything except for maybe those 5 seconds. They were very, very fine there. And now Reload Esports is finishing up on Polta Rock, still facing that big gap between those teams. We're now on a thresh percentage of 70% for Omega Pump, whereas Reload Esports is on 48, so that is so much they need to catch up on. And at this point, they're probably hoping that Omega Pump will fail one of their polls so that they can get back into the game here, which we are for sure not hoping.
Yes, certainly that is the best strategy for Real Esports. You know, there's not really too much different that they can do is the thing, right? Like they're going to hope that Omega Pump is going to die, but besides, like, you know, pulling out their voodoo doll, their Dr. J voodoo doll, and stabbing it a couple times, there's really not much they can do to make that happen. The best thing they can do is just play their route cleanly from here and try and do the best they can to put up a time that will be able to beat a wipe from Omega Pump. As you can see, they are doing just that. They've got their Spear Bastion down beautifully during this pull, and actually this pull is going so cleanly for Reload Esports, but again, something like 2 or 3 minutes behind as a result of that earlier wipe.
Yeah, and that is so sad to see, because it is a team that comes in and has so much force here in this tournament again and again when they are able to channel it. And then we have moments like this where, you know, something goes wrong, and it's kind of that chain of reactions that goes through for them, and then they're so far behind that there is basically nothing they can do to follow up on that lead that the other team has gained. And Omega Pump is, you know, I'm not sure if they know that Reload Esports had that fatal wipe, but they are doing a fantastic job throughout this dungeon. They have Gorge Up nearly down. They will move on from here, and that is so much time they made good on that entire dungeon. They had clean pulls except for that one wipe, and now we should be going to the next boss. And I'm curious to see who they send to trigger the event after they're done with Xav.
Yeah, this will be an interesting decision, because we've seen some teams actually opt to send like a rogue player rather than sending a rather than sending their paladin, because the paladin is just doing more damage anyways. So that will be an interesting decision as the teams are making their way towards that point. Real Esports 75% on Gore Chop. They are 3 minutes behind Omega Pump here, as the Omega Pump activating that banner. One of the reasons that Monk works so well in this dungeon is that the Necrolord utility, they already love playing Necrolord in Mythic Plus. Bone Dust Brew doing so much damage, and it actually lets them get those versatility and speed buffs that are scattered in each wing of this dungeon. So another nice bonus towards playing that spec.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, Omega Pump is getting quite a lot of damage since it pulled 2 of those mini bosses here, and that is very scary, even though it is tyrannical. They have Herugia here while they're still finishing up on Wreck, I think is his name, and that should go down quite well, but there's a lot of tiny mobs here, and that's actually not Wreck. That is, what's his name? Can't think of it right now. Just making it up as I go.
All right. Yeah, you can see here, Omega Pump. Wow, this is actually quite a dangerous pull. Look at all this trash coming in here with both of these mini bosses. Dr. J dropping very low, but they've made it through the worst of this. I think this is much more aggressive than we see most teams doing this. I think we see some teams fighting 2 mini bosses at the same time, but 2 mini bosses and the bridge pull simultaneously is actually a crazy amount of aggression from Omega Pump. But they are not interested in pumping the brakes, even if they know they're ahead, which they might not even be paying much attention to the other team. Some teams like to keep track of where the other team is in the dungeon. Other teams like to put it out of their minds entirely and just focus on their own game. But either way, Omega Pump have decided that they are just going to keep going with their most aggressive pulls. Even if they're a little bit riskier, they know they can make them happen. And they are pulling this captain forward with them at 98% count. They basically don't need any count anymore. So they're going to bring this captain up and they're going to blind it up here. And actually, it looks like they're going to take it with them towards this next boss, while somebody, I think Dr. J is pulling the mini boss off to the side and dropping combat with it. Yeah, that's exactly what they've done. So they actually will be keeping that thing incapacitated, and they'll probably be killing it off while they wait for the boss RP at the end of the dungeon.
Exactly. And it's actually something we've seen happen from other teams before, where that mob gets out of the in-cap after a while and walks into the boss room, and that's always a moment that's very, very, very scary for those teams here, because you need to get like that ice trap back on it very, very quickly. So that is definitely something to look out for here for Omega Pump. And another thing we need to keep in mind, Sogadon is waiting at the bottom here. We see FaceMake and Dr. J going down, and they need to be careful as to not pull Sogadon, because that would be fatal for them at this moment. But it seems like they're doing quite a good job of that. One of them has to defeat the other one, and both of them come back up here. Now they have 2 of those banners that ideally you would want to get out of the way to dodge all of the boss's mechanics, but they have decided to just cleave them down and deal with it that way, it seems.
Yeah, definitely something we have seen cause
No leap.
a lot of problems for a lot of
That
different
was
players.
scary.
Yeah, this boss is not actually easy to deal with if you aren't going to kill off those banners. They have a banner over there at like 10% health, but they're just leaving it. They are focusing damage onto the boss. They are tunneling into the boss instead. And they want to kill this boss. Yeah.
Like something is going wrong for Reload Esports. One of the mobs is not going up. That is not intended that way. The admins are currently looking into it, and we will try to report as soon as we can what they will do with this dungeon here. But that's definitely very unfortunate for Reload Esports.
Yeah, that is a tough spot. You know, sometimes we have these things happen, especially when there's like an observer, you know, floating forward. Sometimes that can cause weird things to happen. As Omega Pump are now making their way towards the end of this dungeon, we know Omega Pump were about 3 minutes ahead as they entered this wing. So they are going to be heading up now towards the last boss at 100% trash count. Just the last boss ahead of them again at some point. We will have a word from the admins about what is going to happen with this situation for Reload Esports. Omega Pump, though, still keeping their run going for now. They are getting started on the last boss. This is one that Prot Warriors deal so much damage to as well. Spell Reflect works on the Reaping Scythe. Reaping Scythe is a very scary mechanic for a lot of tanks. It's 50% physical and 50% magic, but 100% spell reflectable. So a huge amount of extra damage can be dealt to the boss, and also preventing the damage to the warrior themselves. Very, very important.
And that is such a good choice for the tank here, as teams have shown again and again in that MDI tournament of this weekend that the Prot Warrior is just so efficient here. And right now they just need to get away from that portal, and it seems like we are going into a remake. All right.
Yeah, unfortunately with the mob just not activating whatsoever, that sort of just brings in our remake rules. And sorry, was that Settles?
I was gonna say it did activate. It deactivated after they wiped and then wouldn't reactivate.
Yeah, and so of course whenever the dungeon is just not functioning properly, that is of course going to be grounds for a remake. So we will be remaking the dungeon for both of these teams so that we will be able to make sure they can actually complete it. So I have noticed that Necthera in particular takes more time to activate than his opposing like duelist there, so I'm not sure what exactly causes it to bug out and everything like that. But like I said, we'll be remaking it to allow both teams to be able to have a fair shake at actually completing the dungeon and getting it all down. But what were some of the impressions you were seeing thus far here, Dratnos?
Yeah, I mean, this run was looking pretty good out of both teams. Again, Reload Esports had that one wipe towards the Kultharok wing, which they did deal with fairly well, as well as could be expected given the wipe. They did a good job of bouncing back, not having anything further going wrong with the pathing, and making their way through the rest of the dungeon. Omega Pump, though, were looking so good as well. They had a very fast strategy that I think is, if they can replicate that result, will continue to be very strong against Reload Esports here.
Yeah, that's right. And, with the stakes on the line as they are, Omega Pump was looking pretty strong as, of course, they were entering into more Dretha, but it's also going to be about that consistency for these teams here, Settles.
Dude, they had that one spicy pull that was in that champion wing. That one with the double champions and all those arbalists. That pull was very scary because they don't have it stacked in the way that you really want it to be stacked. And so that was just like a lot of group-wide damage for their side. I thought that pull was very ambitious just as a whole. Maybe it was going poorly compared to how it should normally go. It was just like an issue of like the mobs not being stacked. So everything was dying not at the same time. And you had like multiple arbalists around for a very long time. And so... I mean, Omega Pump is definitely sad that they're in that situation. Reload Esports is very happy that they kind of got bailed out after that wipe on that Portal Guardian, though, is what I will say.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it is kind of a sad situation for both teams, because I do think Omega Pump, obviously they would have won this if, nothing would have gone wrong on the very last boss. But I think now they get the chance to show that they can replicate what they just did now and still be the winner, maybe. And for Reload Esports, it's just a chance to show that even though something might have gone wrong before, they can now come back and have a really good mindset here and try to challenge Omega Pump, who looked just very good in that dungeon now.
Yeah, it's always rough whenever you have a remake in a situation like this where, the other team is so close to finishing the dungeon. But it's important for our tournament rules that we aren't trying to make these determinations of like, oh, who would have won, right? And instead we're deciding on these remake policy on a consistent application of like, is the dungeon completable still or is it not? And in this case, that mini boss just not activating was a pretty...
Okay.
Yeah.
I figured it out. Somebody pinged me about this. Apparently, it's whenever you vanish off that mob. Apparently, if you vanish it off, it'll deactivate and not come back out. Don't do that.
You've had like 3 different ways you were sure about how this one works in the past 2 minutes.
I wasn't sure of anything.
The swings from Kettles.
Do not vanish or meld it off, I guess, is the... Do not try to do this in your runs. You will fail miserably. It'll be very sad. Very sad state of affairs.
True.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we saw them already feeling very, very sad about that outcome there. And, yeah, unfortunately, just the nature of how they activate as well, because there's always the 2 different duelists that you can activate. And I never seem to have a problem with the activation of not Nekthera, his opponent and everything like that. Activates, like, easily, no problem and everything like that. So we'll be figuring that out. And like we said, this is going to be our lower semis game between Omega Pump and Reload Esports as Theater of Pain. We had to deal with all the nasty necrotic and spiteful affixes on top from this dungeon. And overall, it didn't seem like there was as much of scary moments as we're used to seeing in some of the higher trash density dungeons, Dratnos, because of the warrior and the removals and everything that they have at their control,
Okay, so here is the ruling that we have for this one. Since the dungeon was not completable for Team Reload Esports, we are remaking the dungeon, but since Omega Pump were able to complete the dungeon, we will allow them to use the best of their 2 times across that last run and this next one. So it's actually upside as well for them in that they can make that run even better, perhaps. And also, if something were to go wrong for them on this run, they still have that time that they locked in from this one that we just had. So that is the ruling on the field from the tournament organizers. I think hopefully that one will land and feel fair for both teams. It's always, of course, again, rough whenever something like this happens, and it's particularly towards the end of a map when so much of it has already been played. And yeah, like you were saying, Jack, I mean, I think that even though this is a dungeon that has such, small linear pulls in theory, both teams were finding ways to go aggressive with this, right? You could see, again, just from the side of Omega Pump, pulling those 2 mini bosses and that bridge pull together is such an ambitious strategy and such a scary combination of enemies to do. And that's one of the things, you normally just don't think about that as being possible, but they were able to make it work and make it work cleanly. So incredibly impressive out of them.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to be getting, of course, all the teams ready in just a moment here. But again, like we said, because of a bug in the dungeon on the side of Reload Esports, that we are going to be remaking it. But we will take the best of Omega Pump's times, both from this dungeon and the previous one, just to make sure that, we would hate to see a situation where Omega Pump just has a wipe after doing a very clean, well-executed run and everything like that, just to be able to lose that series, especially because they are going to be facing elimination titles.
Yeah, and we're trying to get the time that they put up in that most recent run. The best time that we'd seen in Theater of Pain across the weekend was in 1942. Omega Pump had ended up pulling the last boss somewhere around the 19-minute mark. I didn't see what the final time was. It's probably somewhere in the 20-ish range. So what that run that they had, like finishing that in that time, that's a very fast run. Like that is truly a very, very swift dungeon. And so I think that they will probably be pretty happy with the result. It's not like a great thing, but it is what it is. And I do think that Reload Esports has a lot that they've shown us that they can do. And for them, they're going to take this one in stride, be like, all right, one takesy backsies. Please one.
All right.
Yeah.
And I think we're just getting the time that Omega Pump would have had, and it should be 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So with the one death they had on Stone, it should be 2018 that they finished their first run. It would be very interesting to see if maybe they can even one-up themselves. And even if it's just running that same dungeon again in the style they did without that 5-second death, it would still be a better time than before, and would still, the better time is the one they get to use. So I think that's a very fair way to handle this right now. And I'm excited to see what the teams come up with.
20 minutes, 16 seconds, and 135 milliseconds is going to be the time to beat here for both of these teams. That is going to be Omega Pump's run from the previous attempt there, and we are going again. Omega Pump will use the best of their time this time and that time. Reload Esports just has this one time that they will be putting up in the run once we get that started, once we get the players back in there. And yeah, like you said, this is a tough thing for the mindset of players as well. This is the sort of thing where something outside of your control throws a wrench into your game plan. But part of being a competitor in the MDI is that sometimes, you have to deal with unexpected things. And no matter how much you practice and you lay your plans, something out of your control can come in on the first match you play of the day. And just whether that throws you off for the rest of the day or whether you roll with the punches is what separates the great teams from the good teams.
Yeah, and right now we're going to be having everybody's kind of chance to prove themselves as well on this one, because we have been looking at, in particular, Omega Pump and Reload to be those teams that consistency has been in question. And also their ability to just staunch any sort of mistakes that they're making titles to avoid them from becoming even worse. We've seen that a number of times this weekend throughout a lot of our different teams of just being able to get the battle res up on the healer if somebody's dying, or even the tank or anything like that, and avoid these huge wipes.
Yeah, and being able to recover from mistakes is actually just one of the most important things. And Reload's mistakes at the very beginning of that Theater of Pain with that Portal Guardian, that was really bad. That's one of those mistakes that once you have a couple of people die there, you're not able to really recover, because then you just had the healer and the tank running around, and then a necrotic bolt volley went off, and then it's just you can afford one death if you have a battle res up, asterisk, kind of thing, occasionally, sometimes. But yes, having good recovery is something that makes a good team into a great team, because you're always going to have mistakes at some point. You're going to have these deaths that occur, and it's just going to come down to how you're able to retool, recover, and just go again. Sometimes you just have to pull again.
That's right. And, thankfully we don't have to worry about Reload Esports or anything worrying about Necrotic Wake until a little bit later on in the dungeons as well, because that's always been the dungeon that's been their kryptonite, for example. But when we get outside of that dungeon, we've been particularly impressed as how well they've been able to play. And, Omega Pump seems to be kind of more even across the board with some of their dungeons. So it's kind of interesting to look at which dungeons some teams just are really, really favorable on, and others that they might struggle with.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think we talked about this yesterday as well, because sometimes you have a dungeon that you perform really well in, and then you go to the MDI and it gets affixes that just don't work with the strat you had played it all the time. And you need to come up with a new strat. And that's so hard to do if you played a similar strat over and over and over again, and now you need to adapt to it. And I think that is the major problem that Reload Esports had with that necrotic wake in the past 2 days. So that is definitely something to keep in mind, that due to the different keystone and affixes, they need to adapt, find new strategies, find new synergies in their team comps, and so on and so on. That is very, very hard, and also what makes these competitors so very good at this game. The one thing that kind of entertains me a little bit is that whoever wins in this tournament or in this matchup here in the best of 3 between Omega Pump and Reload Esports, they will face Echo, and the first map will be a necrotic wake. So if Reload Esports manages to win here, right now it's 1-0 on their matchup, and if they manage to win, they will face Echo on a necrotic wake. So that will be super brutal. I'm very, very excited to see what happens next. But even if Omega Pump, now with their 2018 time, which is a really good time, manages to get that win here and face Echo, it will also be very harsh on them, since facing Echo is, not something many teams look forward to.
That's right, and they're just going to be the wall in that lower finals game as well that everybody's going to try to overcome. The winner of this series is going to have a very, very tough time, and I don't really think any of the top 4 make for some easy opponent or anything, Dranos. We talk about, Echo is fantastic and has such a long and rich history, but we just saw Incarnation defeat them and actually qualify for the Globals off the back of that, and then we saw yesterday, Reload Esports just playing neck and neck with Echo and barely getting edged out in some of those games. So really, this top 4 has been insanely impressive.
Yeah, if you're Echo, though, you got to be so glad that this looks like it could go potentially to a 3-game series and potentially to a 4-game series, right? If we get a remake like this coming in, adding an extra game here, you're just like, yes, my potential opponent, let's just have him come in nice and exhausted while we have all this extra time to practice. Yes.
Don't mind if I do.
Don't mind if I do.
Do you think they're rubbing their hands together like that as
well? Do you think they bribed that NPC to just not activate? They're just like, you take today off, just hang out there. don't get in combat.
Gingy snuck into their dungeon and was like, have some ELX, you deserved it today, big
I was going to say, they were memeing about ELX before, and maybe Gingy just offered them, special discount if they get that mob too. No, I don't think so, but yeah.
For the record, this is pure conspiracy.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Well, it looks like our teams are finally
too close to the truth. Yeah, if you don't hear from him again, you know what happened.
Exactly.
Y'all are ridiculous.
These are my last words. Remember me.
Game number 2 here in Theater of Pain. Of course, we had to make the remake between Omega Pump and Reload Esports, but if Omega Pump is going to keep the best of their 2 times, so let's see if they can improve upon it. Let's see if Reload Esports can bounce back. Game number 2 begins once again here in Theater.
And both of those teams go in with the same poll we've seen before in Dratna, something that is very, kind of on my mind right now. How is Omega Pump going to deal with this, right? They have that time of 2018 that they know they did before, and will they think, okay, Reload Esports could be playing better than that, they could be getting at 2017 or something like that, so we need to try and be really, really good here and even play better than we did before, just don't get that one death or get that one pack better together so we can dish out more damage in shorter time or anything like that? Or will they be a little bit more like, we have a really good run down with 2018 and we're just gonna play it clean and play it down, and we're fine with that? That's something I'm very curious about.
Yeah, it's interesting because, in theory, if you knew you could get 2 runs at a dungeon, you would do a safe-ish fast path first, and then you would go with a much more aggressive plan, right? You would do a 95% success rate route, and then a 50% success rate route if that worked out well, and try and improve on your time that way. But in practice, you know, that's not something you've actually prepared for, right? It's not a situation anybody expects to be in before the day started. So, and I don't really think there's any ways you could look at Omega Pump's pulls and be like, oh yeah, here's a way that might actually work, that we could pull even faster than we did last time. But you know, one thing that we get to compare is we get to compare their boss split timings from this run to last run. And they've actually gained 10 seconds on their timing from the first boss of the last run of this dungeon. So they are zooming this time around. They are coming back with a vengeance. Whereas Reload Esports have lost 15 seconds relative to their boss 1 split from last time. So they've had a much slower start to this dungeon already as we get into Executioner Varuth for Omega Pump.
Yeah, you're right. Zooming is the correct term for what they're doing. They're just not looking left and right, running through this dungeon here. While Reload Esports is a little bit behind, just now arriving at the bottom. And they are now rounding up that pull that Omega Pump is already in. And you know, as we've seen before, anything could go wrong at any time, and especially the next win is one where you don't want to have any full wipes just because it takes so long to travel anywhere with all of those portals. And it's looking really good for both of those teams here. Omega Pump still having the lead. They already finished with that pull. We're going to see the same Shroud Skip we've seen before, and then go into that Incinerator Guardian pull together with 3 Shackled Souls. And Reload Esports will be trying to replicate that same pull here in just a few seconds.
Yeah, Omega Pump looking to get this pull started, and they have done just that. Are there going to be Shackled Souls coming in here as well? Yes, there are. Reload Esports making their Shroud work as well. They are getting started with this pull. This is a scary pull. This didn't wipe either team last time, but it is a pull that certainly has the potential to do that. As you can see, all of these Shackled Souls are getting low for Omega Pump, and they are going to have to start dealing with the Spiteful Shades that spawn out of them. This can be a pretty scary moment, because one Spiteful Shade hit connecting with you will absolutely make the AoE damage from the other 2 mobs lethal. As Reload Esports kiting down the stairs, they just have the Incinerator left here, but it is still at half health, whereas for Omega Pump, they have just finished it off. So yeah, half a Tormented mob is the advantage that Omega Pump have opened so far.
Is that an American measurement?
Yep, that's it's as logical as the rest of our units of measurement.
Yeah, Reload Esports is now finishing up on that Incinerator and will move to that portal, whereas Omega Pump is already on the next platform. And really, they should not be running into any troubles here. On this platform, Simkins earlier died due to what we assume was a spiteful hit. Now, I hope that won't happen this time around, so they can make up for the lost time before, but still, they need to play that Bone Magus and the Spiteful Shade. And it seems like their damage was a little bit off focus here, because they're taking very long and now doing what we call, you know, one mob gaming, which you usually want to avoid in any type of form. We can see Omega Pump going in with that really, really big pull here, and they're dishing out damage like it's nothing. Dr. J topping those meters beautifully, and now they just need to kite the Spiteful Shades.
Yeah, Reload Esports, so what they were up to... Oh no, Face Mitt goes down for Omega Pump. They are going to be able to use the res here, but that is still going to cost them 15 seconds or so. Back to that point about what was happening on that platform. Reload Esports killed those Bone Maguses. They killed them one after the other to deal with the Spiteful, right? They killed one, waited for its Spiteful to expire, and then killed the next one, and they all clicked the portal while the Spiteful was spawning. Whereas what Omega Pump did is they were coordinated enough to kill both of them within a couple of milliseconds of each other, so that they could also click the portal before the Spiteful spawns. Once that Spiteful spawns, it gets somebody in combat, and they can't take the portal anymore. So both teams were playing around that affix just differently, right? And Omega Pump's is like harder to execute. It's hard to kill 2 mobs within a couple milliseconds of each other, but it saves you time, of course.
Absolutely. That's normally something, you know, in the MDI, being a timed format, obviously you would want to try and save as much time as possible. And right now, both teams are on the same pull. Omega Pump is nearly done with it, still kiting those shades and dealing with the Bone Reaver, whereas Reload Esports just started, but they're having really, really good damage here. Marky is showing what he can do, right followed by Simkins, and they're getting quite close to Omega Pump, at least it feels right. I mean, you know, I'm not a 5-hat in American measurements, but it feels like half a Bone Reaver is less than half an Incinerator, so maybe they're just closer now.
Yeah, I think that one death and the 10 seconds to cast Redemption as well for Mode ends up probably cutting that lead in half or so. Although you can see Reload Esports, they're taking their time here finishing off these last 2 mobs. Omega Pump nearly ready to take the next portal. They actually have to kill off all these Spiteful Shades, though. Not all 3 mobs killed at the same time. And for Omega Pump, this may actually be one of the runs we see them just gaining so much time in as well, because they're kind of under no pressure, right? They know that no matter what happens to them, they've locked in a nice run, right? They've locked in a 20-minute and 16-second run, whereas Reload Esports know they not only have to beat that time, they also have to beat Omega Pump's time from this run. So they are under kind of double pressure, and Omega Pump under much less pressure than normal as they get started with Cult of Rock. There is the Ashen Hallow, and they are doing as much damage as they can on pull here.
Absolutely. And I'm very curious to see how they're going to lock in that time for Cult of Rock, both of those teams. And you just said it's 1816. Is it 1816 or 2016 or 2018?
Yeah.
Just so we know what to look out for.
2016 and then 135 milliseconds. 2016.
All right. Gotta make sure we have it correct. Okay. So we'll keep that in mind. 2016, the run that Omega Pump had here. And right now they're on 60% on Cult of Rock, while Reload Esports is running in here, also putting down that Ashen Hallow, bursting all of their cooldowns. And just a little while, we still see Shadow Blades ready on Ankler, while Simpkins is pulling the Shackled Souls up. And that's not a lot of Shackled Souls that we're seeing here. I think normally we only saw around 3 of them being pulled onto the boss, and here it seems like they have 6 left.
Yeah, this is a lot of extra mobs coming in here. They do benefit quite a bit from this, right? They actually get nice bits of AoE damage, Mark of the Crane stacks on each of those extra mobs. So it does even help the single target a little bit there. As you can see, Reload Esports 40%, 35% behind on the boss HP. They are accelerating a little bit here, trying to catch up with Omega Pump. We will be able to compare this boss 2 split as well between this map and last map. I have opened a screenshot of what last maps looked like. So already we can see Omega Pump certainly are going to be a little bit slower on their boss 2 split as a result of that death than they were last time. Last time they were able to go for only 7 minutes and 5 seconds between boss 1 and boss 2. This time it's going to be closer to 7:30 for them. Whereas Reload Esports, of course, ended up being 10 minutes on that split as a result of their full team wipe. They are definitely much better off this time compared to last time. But I think they are still going to, even though they didn't have any deaths in this wing, it's still going to be a slower wing for them than it was for Omega Pump. This is kind of insane. I mean, Omega Pump losing all that time and Reload Esports. Yeah.
You have to keep in mind, Reload Esports has 4% trash more than Omega Pump. So
That's
that is a little time off of that gap that we can, at the moment, not really measure. But yeah, definitely. Omega Pump is way ahead of them, even with this run, and not only the one that was locked in before due to the remake that was had here. There's a meat shield coming through on the Mega Pump's big pull here. That's usually something you would want to avoid, but it's not as bad as one of the Withering Discharges going through. And they can handle that pull quite easily this time around. It seems like Stone is very stable. He's not going to die in front of his team this time, and they're just finishing up on some of those shades and the Putrid Butcher.
Yeah, they're doing a great job making their way now towards the rest of this Gore Chop wing as Reload Esports are just about to get started. So they are a full pull behind here as they now get going into that big pull. Omega Pump going to shroud down towards the bridge section. And there's not really too much time left in the dungeon. You know, there's this pull, there's the boss, then there's the Zav wing, which is a pretty short wing, all things considered. And then 2 more bosses, and then this dungeon is over. Time is running out.
Marky goes down for Reload Esports here in that ginormous pull, and that's another 5 seconds they get on top of that. Malik is very, very low, trying to kite his way out of it, and there's a Withering Discharge, but they interrupted in the very last second. This pull is still running through the area here for Reload Esports. That's not looking the way it should be, but they seem to be able to finish it off just at this moment with some of the Spiteful Shades still running around, but that was not the coordination we saw from them in Sanguine Depths. An Anchor dropping really, really low. That is cheat death procced for him. That is not what you want to see.
Yeah, Reload Esports, one thing that I'm really impressed with is their discipline here, holding on to that stone form. Malik was in so much danger on that pull, but he ended up kiting instead of pressing stone form to clear his stacks, and I think that's knowing that next pull is going to be even more dangerous, and that he absolutely needs to have stone form available for that pull. So definitely something that they have practiced, they have prepared for, they have that planned out in their mind as they are getting started with this next pull. What are they up to here? So they're sneaking through, and they are taking this onto the boss, right? That's the Reload Esports game plan. This is made possible by that extra 4% they got in the Cult of Rockwing, right? So they get to go just straight into this boss here, and they don't need to do that whole big bridge pull. So again, they're actually fairly close here to where Omega Pump are at, but they don't have to just beat Omega Pump's time this time. They also have to beat that time they put up last run of 20 minutes and 16 seconds.
Can you just quickly remind us what the times were on boss 3 for both of those teams, since, you know, chat and
so
doesn't see the times?
The boss 3 split for Omega Pump last time was 4 minutes and 20 seconds. So that's that number that's currently advancing right now. And when you combine their boss 1 and boss 2 splits, it's about the same as it was last time. They were a little bit faster on boss 1 this time, a little bit slower on boss 2, and they end up being at right around the same spot. So yeah, if they can hit that 4 minutes 20 mark again, which is a funny number, of course, as well, then that will be them, you know, on the same pace as they were last time. Any faster, and they're doing faster. Any slower, and they're doing slower.
Yeah, thank you for that great explanation. And right now, we're seeing Reload Esports do their very best to follow up here. They're running, they're chasing. But will it be enough in the very end? Megapump is nearly finished with Gorchup here. They will move on to that Saf wing that you talked about earlier. There's that one pull that's a little bit spicy that we saw from them, which Tattles also elaborated on, where, you know, everything was like sort of everywhere instead of grouped up to do nice damage onto it. And I'm curious to see if a Megapump will be able to execute it a little more cleanly this time when it comes to that pull.
Yeah, Omega Pump now they're about 10 seconds faster than their run was last time. So this is rough for Reload Esports. Even though Reload Esports are doing so much better than Reload Esports were last run, they are behind both Omega Pump's previous and current attempts, and they are going to need something incredible here to happen for them if they want to take this map. Omega Pump already getting started with this 3 pull as they're sort of edging their way towards the next area of the dungeon, and this is where Omega Pump does the scariest pull of the dungeon, in my opinion. You can see Nick rolling ahead there, activating that banner, and then they are going to fight 2 mini-bosses and 7 skeletons all at the same time.
Yeah, and we see Dr. J just running back, trying to trap that mob back there, and that worked beautifully. Now they have everything a little bit grouped, but still all of the tiny ants are at the other side of that round area here, and we see, oh, that was the AoE going into the group. That's something you want to avoid, but they managed to pull everything sort of more together. Harukia is still out, but now they're getting her in, so they're trying their very best to get that pull together and under control, and it seems like it's working. There's a lot of damage coming onto the group here, and Reload Esports is just following right behind them, currently fighting Nekthara and Harugia together, but they decided to not pull all of those tiny ads into this pull, and that is definitely something that will count towards a Mega Pump. Although they're struggling a little bit on that pull, they're managing to kill everything off, and that will save them time since it is 1 pull that they're doing and not 2. Now we see Malik going in and pulling all of that together with Harugia, and they're going to stack it up here as we've seen other teams do before, but they still need a lot of trash count here.
Yeah, Maystein going to pull that mob off to the side, using evasion to avoid dying to it, and then we'll end up vanishing to drop combat with the mini-boss as they now make their way towards the 4th boss of the dungeon here, Zav the Unfallen. Once they can kill off this boss, they're pretty much home free. The big danger is if Sagadon gets pulled in the middle of this boss fight. That is something we've seen happen to several teams already, and if that happens, it is pretty much a wipe unless everybody instantly reacts with Shadow Melds.
Very, very true, and it's not something that we wouldn't have seen before, so it can happen. It's a very, very real danger for them here. Facemake just rolling out last second, but Maystein gets in a little bit of trouble here, can recover though, and now will go down together with FaceMic, and they will have... Oh,
Whoa.
that was so close! Oh no! But he managed to do it. That was scary. I nearly fell off my chair. Oh lord.
And you can see Omega Pump now making their way back up to the boss here. They're going to fire off the Bloodlust. The Ring of Peace comes down, and I think that's going to be used on the captain, which is CC'd off to the side and is going to be walking into the room in the near future. I think that was what that Ring of Peace was for. We'll see if we can catch it, maybe trapped off to the side at some point as Omega Pump end up actually cleaving down those banners. So they are once again free to move about in this room. They haven't focused the banners very much, but they end up just being cleaved down whenever they're in their cooldowns with Bloodlust and Ashen Hallow and Resonating Arrow, just effectively destroying them for free.
Absolutely, and I think it's working out for them quite well. We've seen them in a little bit of a tough spot again and again due to just not having that much movement speed when dodging the boss combo and the banners still being there, but they managed to get through it quite okay with just using everything that was around. Now they're just finishing up on that captain. It seems like Mobile has run to trigger the event of the final boss while the rest of the team does the ancient captain. Now they will also continue to move on here, and I think in terms of time we're doing quite good for Omega Pump here, right?
Omega Pump are on pace here for a sub 20-minute run. Actually, they are doing substantially faster than they were last time around. They are something like 30 seconds ahead if they can hold on to that advantage on this last boss fight. Meanwhile, tragedy strikes for Reload Esports, and Reload Esports are in such a difficult position now because they, even if something goes wrong for Omega Pump, you know, Omega Pump have already locked in a 20-minute run, and if you're Reload Esports, there's kind of no way you're going to make that happen from this point. They are in so much pressure, but luckily, it is not the end of the series for them. Even if Omega Pump wins here, they will get to go to a Game 3 and have one final chance as they get sent down, nearly pulling Sagadon, but not quite for Reload Esports. It's all about Mordretha, though. Will Omega Pump be able to improve on their time of 20 minutes and 16 seconds? It's all going to come down to how much damage they can deploy right now.
But it's looking really, really good for a Mega Pump here, and I am, for one, very happy to see they did not come to play safe. They decided 2016 was not enough for them. They were going to go back in and prove to everybody that they can do even better than that. They're not just resting on what they have achieved before, but fighting here to make sure they get that win in. And Mordretha is on 50% now. They have 2 battle rests ready. They just need to move away from that portal. That's a very unfortunate spawn for them here, as they are so close, but they can manage to get away. Now they just need to survive that final stage with all of the running Tauruses going through the room. It's something that I may or may not have suffered to before, as you know, as a melee player, but they definitely do not suffer from being hit by those mobs. 10% left to go for Omega Pump, and they are finishing up beautifully sub 20 as it seems.
Yeah, they are putting up a great time here, and they are going to win this map with a 1950 being their final time. Impressive time and composure from Omega Pump, evening up the series 1-1.
That's right, there it is with the victory for Omega Pump, doing better than they previously had done, and also having a pretty darn close time compared to Incarnation as well there, Tettles, who had a 1942. There we go on the timer.
Ooh. Yeah. And that Omega Pump run, it really was, like a decent bit better than their first run just because of like a couple of pulls. They did have that stone death in the Gorechop wing, which cost them a little bit of time. And I mean, that 5 seconds plus like the travel time plus the damage lost, they could have absolutely have gone head to head within a few seconds of the Incarnation time, which is very good for Omega Pump to be able to improve on their time in this Theater of Pain. And it looks, I mean, it's the first match in the finals. Obviously, they have to go through some other teams if they would win to be able to make it there. But them having a strong Theater of Pain is a great showing by Omega Pump.
Yep, and it is also going to mean that we're tying up the series 1-1, so both teams are still going to be in it, and we're also going to be forcing that game number 3. But before we get into that third game in the series titles, what do you got for us from this theater?
Yeah, so the big time save over the most previous run, they ended up saving about 30 seconds on this pull, by the way. They were able to get this pack stacked a lot quicker. They were getting the Arbalists and all of these conscripts just grouped up a little bit better, and they weren't having to run out as much just on this pack. There was a lot of things that went not ideal with this pull the first time around, and they were able to just improve on them the second time through, and it looked great. Just as a whole, their run altogether, very strong by Omega Pump.
That's right, and with that victory, we kind of set our sights here, Makes, on Halls of Atonement, so we'll be looking at this as the decider between Omega Pump and Reload as to who is going to be moving on to face up against Echo.
Definitely, and that will be very, very interesting because we've seen a Halls of Atonement from Reload Esports before when they were facing Echo, and that was a very, very good run. It would have only cost Echo just a minor mistake for Reload Esports to swoop in and take that dungeon from them. So definitely a dungeon that we've seen them perform really, really well in. Whereas Omega Pump, I'm not sure, but I don't think we've seen them in Halls of Atonement this weekend yet. So I'm not sure how much they concentrated on their dungeon. I've seen Mode run Theater of Pain earlier today. So it will come down to like who managed to practice that dungeon better and who has the better route. I'm very curious to see what kind of class picks we will see from both of those teams. And in the end, who will take the win and face Echo in that lower final match.
Yeah, and we haven't actually yet seen Omega Pump play through this dungeon, Dratno, so we already know that Reload Esports has a very strong route throughout this one. Did they get like the Dratno special to prepare themselves for this one? Or?
No, this is a Reload Esports original. They have got some nice strategies for this dungeon. The way they've actually figured out, and I don't know if other teams have adapted to this yet, but Reload Esports have a way to get those channelers that are channeling into Halkias to not be killed by the bosses it spawns. And that is actually a nice way to get some good extra count into your pull onto the boss. They're having Simkins run up and Frost Nova those mobs. So look out for that when we get into that game before Halkias, and you can see a way that they get a little bit more count into that pull. Every little bit of count helps. It means you have to make the other pulls a little bit less big, and that can help a lot.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing for me for Reload Esports is we talk about how they'll have some deaths and just like some not great runs from time to time. Both of their Halls of Atonements that we've seen from them so far have been 0 death runs. So their Halls of Atonement and their Sanguine Depths, like from that we saw a little bit earlier in the series, those are some of their best dungeons. Like the Reload Esports, those are some of their best dungeons. We haven't seen Omega Pump's Halls of Atonement like we talked about earlier, and so they're going to have to bust out something very impressive to be competitive. But Halls of Atonement, one of the most popular dungeons. I think it's not the hardest dungeon to practice, I would say, over this weekend. Plus, it was one of the time trial dungeons coming into the whole entire MDI. So these teams should have a decent bit of practice on it. Omega Pump with that 5th seed, they should be prepared for Halls of Atonement. I think that they will probably make a good showing out of the whole entire ordeal.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, we did see almost exactly the same times out of Incarn and Reload Esports here. So there's a lot more to look for from these different teams for Omega Pump's perspective as well, Makes, because they had to know that, Halls of Atonement was eventually going to be something that they would have to worry about, that they would have to practice, whether Omega Pump made it to the upper finals or whether they're here where they are right now in those lower semis.
Absolutely. So I'm just very curious to see what they come up with, what they have prepared, as it is a mystery up until now. We will see in just a few seconds. And I'm ready to be entertained by both of those teams in what they will show in that Halls of Atonement here, what strategies they deploy. Halls of Atonement is really a great dungeon because you have all of those things we love to see, right? You get those really, really big pulls together that you can just do unethical damage, as Dratnos would say, into. And I think that's something that, for example, Dr. J has been very known for, to just, get those huge pulls and do insane amounts of DPS into them. So I think it's a dungeon that should be right up their alley, but what they make of it, we can only guess.
And Reload Esports, they almost had a 13-minute run versus Echo, but whenever they played Sepako is our carry, like Dranus was talking about earlier, that Halkias Frost Nova thing where you get those additional mobs, they messed it up. So they ended up having to go to like 106% count or something very silly.
Yeah.
And that just shows like how bad it, like it ended up costing them something in the range of like 1 minute and 30 seconds just by messing up that one pull. So they lost a lot of time. So Reload Esports does have a lot of time that they can save. It'll in their best run is probably around the 13-minute mark. But if they mess up just like one minor thing, like that Halkias route, they can lose 1.5 minutes very quickly and be forced to kill one additional trash pack.
Yeah, and that's probably what's most exciting as well. Just kind of similar to what we saw out of the previous series here, Dratus, between Incarn and Echo. You have a lot of like really quick back-to-back fast dungeons where every single pull just counts for so much. And that also puts an incredible amount of stress on the tank, on the healer, on everybody, really.
Yeah, some of these pulls, you know, particularly like the first pull of the dungeon, the second pull of the dungeon. Oh, that's most of the dungeon, actually, in Halls of Atonement.
Yeah.
That's it, right? You've got 80% count of a boss done when that's also done. Yeah, that's, I mean, they are scary pulls with a lot that can go wrong, and you're relying on all of this damage coming out, right? You're relying on having everything work out for you, because if just like one cooldown, one person dies, one cooldown doesn't land, the pull lasts a little bit longer, all of a sudden you're getting to the spot where you're out of kicks, you're out of stuns, all these things that you have, the throughput of the Ashen Hallow expires, and if the mobs aren't dead by then you're going to be very soon after.
Yep, and we've seen time and time again where just being able to shut down the mobs or just kill them off quickly. Hell, I think we even had like an analyst segment there, Tettles, where you talked about how stacked some of the mobs were on top of the Shard of Halkias as well. And just what a difference little things like that make in terms of how much damage the group takes, how much danger is going on, all of it.
Dude,
that was the
on
Echo
top of
match,
that,
right?
Yeah, there's also the inspired mobs. Like getting all of those mobs stacked up as quickly as you possibly can it's very crucial for your tank to be able to live, because you have like obliterators casting bolts into your tank. There's a lot of magic damage going into tanks in these dungeons, and they are typically going to be the people that are most susceptible to dying inside of Halls of Atonement.
That's right, and we'll have to be watching for all these little deaths that can happen here. This is going to be the decider between Omega Pump and Reload Esports, one of which is going home. The other is going to face off against Echo for their Global Finals qualification. Let's get into it. Game number 3 here in Halls.
Both teams are going so big here. They're both heading to the right, grabbing all of this trash into the incinerator, and they're both going to line of sight here around to the left. We've seen Reload Esports looking so good with how they moved this up. Let's see how Omega Pump does it, though, as every cooldown gets used.
They actually just practiced that very pull right before they started that dungeon here to make sure they get it right. So I'm very happy to see that it's going well for them. There is one mob that just comes running in at that very moment, one of the Dark Blades that didn't get pulled into it. I'm not sure if those Dark Blades were even in on Reload's pull, because I think they're from the very middle, but we'll have to see after this pull is done. Reload Esports now finishing up on that last Gargan with 26%. They're still in Bloodlust, getting that anima power and now running off, whereas Omega Pump is still in fight with that dungeon, and it seems like they have the same percentage. No, see, they have those 2 extra Dark Blades. So I'm not sure if that in the end makes that much of a difference. But as you said before, you want to have that one big pull, then another big pull, and that's basically all of your dungeon Halls of Atonement for you. So 29% here, but they are a little bit slower than their opponents. So they will need to make sure that they get that time in here now on that second pull.
Yeah, this is actually pretty, I don't think it's a good exchange. I don't think you'd pay that much time for those 3%, but maybe Omega Pump can find a way to make that save them some time later. Reload Esports, though, already finishing off this pull, heading towards the rest of the dungeon. And once again, we actually have Simkins playing that Night Fae Mage Legendary, whereas Dr. J is on the Frozen Orb one. And I think that, just like in Sanguine Depths, this might be a huge difference for Reload Esports. We've seen that thing just doing so much damage when it's being played by Simkins here. And I think that, if this series ends with Reload Esports winning this game and winning the Sanguine Depths, it might just be, those are the 2 ones where Simkins gets to play Mage, right? And I don't know, he's just looked so strong on that class.
Yeah, the Simkins special, definitely. He is performing so well, and I'm actually shocked to see that other mages are not copying his playstyle, since it seems to be working out so well for Reload Esports again and again. So definitely something I will look up later and ask teams about, because I'm very curious about what the different decision makers are here for them to decide, nah, I don't want to adapt to it because maybe it just changes too much of the polls that they planned, or maybe it's just too difficult and change of playstyle. I don't know. But Reload Esports is now setting up that poll that we talked about earlier, and we see Simkins running in here, Frost knowing, as you said, then getting all of the rest together, and that's such a beautiful setup that they're doing, and I love to see it. Now Omega Pump is trying to do the same, as it seems. Maystein running over, but I don't think he'll get in fight with the Halkias mobs. He's just getting that stone boy for us too. Where is he?
Omega Pump. They're looking at the middle of the room there. Some Mind Suits have come out to let their team just kind of walk through that area safely. And yeah, all of these crowd-controlled mobs getting collected together. They're taking a little bit of time here, and they actually didn't get those 3 collectors that Reload Esports have found a way to get from the boss. You can see they're all corpses on the side of Omega Pump, killed by the spawning of Halkias. So Reload Esports are going to be able to get those extra couple of percentage points here, and that probably makes up for the few percent that Omega Pump found on their first pull, if I had to guess. Reload Esports a solid 20% ahead on Halkias now. Definitely things going well for them so far, but you can see their group taking quite a bit of damage. Ankler actually in a bit of that defiled ground here.
Oh, and they're actually like adding more onto that pole right now that Omega Pump had in there from the beginning, but they're still fighting it, and the ground under them is turning red as they lose some of the area that they want to walk in. There's a Houndmaster right next to them that they probably don't want to pull. Maystein now running around, losing uptime here, trying to get the mobs from behind, getting a little bit of damage onto here, but it is tyrannical. That area hurts so much. Maystein has to fight for his life here, but he seems to be able to make it. He would still have cheat death if necessary. We have the dispersion on from Facenick just running out, and they have auras in there.
Yeah, I don't know if this was intentional, but Oro's Coldheart has joined the party here for Omega Pump. This is going to make the last boss easier, but it's going to make this take quite a while longer, and Halkias is still at 50%. They're going to have to deal with this for quite a while. Maystein there also had that unfortunate circumstance, right? You know, during the rotating beams where it's like, okay, phew, I just walked through all the glass, now I'm in the clear, and then the beams change directions, you have to walk back through all that glass, going in the other direction. Tough spot for Omega Pump. They are able to finish off Oros, though, and I wonder if this was part of the plan. They do get some extra anima powers out of this exchange, but the Oros Coldheart powers aren't DPS increases. They are just defensive and utility tools, so we'll see what that does for Omega Pump, but I have to say, I like where Reload Esports are at now. They've gotten started with Echelon already, and they are gaining time over Omega Pump.
Absolutely, they have enough percentage to just move on from here and do the rest of the trash after Echelon. That will be enough to finish up at their trash count. Whereas Omega Pump now a little bit over their percentage that they need, so I'm not very sure that Aura's pull was, you know, something that they wanted to do, but here we are, and Omega Pump now have to deal with it. Maybe they can make use of it, using that defensive power, letting modes do a lot more damage instead of healing, since Holy Paladins do so much. But here, Facemick procs his Necrolord, and that is the death of him. He needs to be rest. That's another 5 seconds on the counter for Omega Pump here, while Reload Esports is already on 59%. On Echelon, now dealing with the second set of ads coming in. One of them is actually stunned in the very far back.
Yeah, it looks like that thing's just free casting over there for a while. You know, sometimes when these ads spawn, you can trick a couple of them into not getting in combat with you, and then sometimes eventually they'll pull later and just be free casting out on the side. So that may be what's happened for Reload Esports. You can see Simkins ends up getting targeted by that circle. A plus of this comp is that they do have that Curse Dispel. Simkins able to deploy that as needed, so that means that they don't have to they don't actually have to face tank the leap from Echelon. Which some group compositions have no alternative for that and end up just having to take the damage. Omega Pump also on Echelon now 50% behind on the boss.
But maybe they can make up for it. I mean, playing with the shifting power legendary is just a lot of AoE more, right? And Dr. J being on the normal Frozen Orb one, maybe he can dish out a little more single target damage here for a Mega Pump, trying to get that damage dealt out in a more efficient way for their team comp. Since it is tyrannical, they really need that single target damage here. I mean, you do need to cleave the little ones, but that's not focus damage, as to say you really want to be getting that huge HP bars to 0 from those bosses. So maybe that is the deciding factor how Omega Pump can come back here and close the lead that Reload Esports has on them.
Yeah, particularly on the last boss. You know, Simpkins is not going to be far behind on single target on the second and third bosses because there are ads. And the way that the legendary Dr. J is using works is it really helps him keep his Fingers of Frost procs active, even when there aren't a lot of ads to generate those off of. And that is going to be what's the case on the last boss. On the last boss, just pure single target, no ads for your Frozen Orb to be hitting. Simpkins will certainly be doing less damage than Dr. J is there. But you have to factor in, Dr. J also gets to move around freely on the last boss, right? They don't have Aura's Cold Heart's aura affecting that too. So yeah, maybe by the time they get to the last boss, they will actually be able to get quite a bit of an efficiency boost as a result of not having that Tormented Aura. I don't think it will be enough to overcome this amount of health difference on these bosses, but it could be, and it definitely puts them in a position where if Reload Esports have a death or two, they could well be in range to even this thing up.
Absolutely, and I'm curious to see if they can make it. I really want them to close that lead Reload Esports has on them. They're now on the high educator. They had all of the trash in there. We will see a Mega Pump replicate that pull just now going into that boss fight, and that's such a scary pull. Last weekend in the MDI, we had Sanguine in there that turned that pull around for quite a lot of teams. This time around, it's only inspiring, but that can also cause trouble, as we've seen before. It's really not easy to pull this off. Echo had trouble here earlier, and a Mega Pump now needs to prove to themselves that they can handle it. This huge pull for them going into the high agitator rallies, while Reload Esports is on 7%, just finishing up on everything that is there. They still have a collector in that pull and quite a lot of damage coming in onto their team, but Omega Pump is also getting rid of those HP bars in front of them. In what a beautiful DPS manner they do that.
Yeah, this is looking so good for Reload Esports. They have this Gargoyle now, which they're going to mind control and take with them towards this mini-boss. 50% health still on High Adjudicator for Omega Pump. This is going to be a huge amount of extra damage they'll have to do if they want to equalize here. The mini-boss is now being started for Reload Esports, and once it finishes that Dark Communion cast, they are going to start doing just as much damage as they possibly can here, trying to get it killed before it gets to its next Dark Communion cast. On a Tyrannical Keystone, this is usually possible, but it is a 21, which is a fairly high level key, so they do need to make sure they have some damage ready for this mini-boss.
But it seems like they can finish that off super easy, effortless. They go through, just nuke that mini boss out of the way, and now they're on Lord Chamberlain, and that is the boss you were talking about earlier, where we will see Simpkins struggling a little bit with DPS in comparison to what he has put out before, just because there's nothing to cleave on here, and you really need to be a little bit scared when it comes to this boss. I think back in beta we called this one the Yeet Master 3000. For me, nothing has changed since then. And Simpkins actually getting hit by one of the statues. They're going into the seat. Malik is super low, and Mickey now needs to protect his teammates here. Sack is on. Malik is in meta, and they will soon enough play that intermission. Simpkins back out of the seat. Desperate Prayer was on for Marky, and they need to soak that big hit soon enough when it comes to that intermission. Mega Pump, on the other hand, finishing up with High Agitator, now doing the same pull we saw Reload Esports do, and they're gaining time on Reload Esports. They're following up on that lead. They're just so close behind. It's not much that they're missing, but will they be able to catch up?
Yeah, they really need Reload Esports to have a wipe here. I mean, I think that even if they're doing so much more boss damage, Reload Esports just got to this boss so much earlier than them, and I'm not sure how much more damage they'll have, but I don't think they will be able to do the boss twice as fast. They are getting to that boss now. Cooldowns are not available just yet. It's going to be about 90 seconds before they get to their wings, and that will probably be about when we see the Lust fired off for a Mega Pump, and Dr. J ends up going into a seed as well, just like Simpkins did to one of the statue tosses. The mage is just magnetically attracted to these. Yeah, you know, they're used to just being able to tell the group they're going to ignore mechanics, but you can't just tell a statue that you're going to ignore it. It's just, it doesn't care. It's a statue.
Yeah, it's very true, and sometimes that statue just lands right in your face. Reload Esports now popping Bloodlust. Ashen Hallow is down, and they will play that telekinetic onslaught one more time, having to soak it. And if they live through that, it should be easy peasy lemon squeezy, finishing up that dungeon for Reload Esports, as a Mega Pump is still trying to do as much damage as possible here when they can.
Yeah, 5 extra seconds as well for Reload Esports, but they are not going to come anywhere close to needing it. They have almost no mana left here. They are going to use Sack to try and get through the end of this fight. Oh, and Marky nearly taken out by that statue, but it wasn't thrown far enough to end up getting to him. And you can see now 13% on the boss HP. They just have to survive a little bit longer, but Malik is starting to take so much damage. He's got no Fell Devastation for a while, drops out of that metaform, Fiery Brand is used, but other than that, there are basically no remaining
He still should
cooldowns.
have proc, though.
Forced to Kite, no proc either. Basically nothing here, but the boss dies before he does. 2-1 victory for Reload Esports here against Omega Pump. Impressive performance from that team.
Absolutely, and mode goes down in the very last second. Oh no.